Hello, this is John Speelman with the latest article in my monthly chess-based column, which used to be an Agony column but is now just freestyle. It's number 238. I'm going to switch over to it now. I've had a couple of dummy runs which haven't worked, but I finally got everything in, my ducks in line, or whatever you say. And it's column 238, and I've entitled it Royal March because it involves a very long walk by His White Majesty. So what happened was that I was, just see what the time is, okay, I was trying to decide which games to use in my weekly column in the British newspaper The Observer, together with a preview of the candidates. And, well, because the Americans, the article, it's a Sunday paper, The Observer, so this was during round one when Caruana, was playing Nakamura, and so it seems stupid or odd to use a game between them. So I thought, what else shall I do? And I thought, well, let's use a game from the previous candidates. So I looked at the games by Caruana and Nakamura and Prague, who are the three people who played in the last one as well. And eventually I settled on actually one of Nakamura's losses. His loss in very early on to Vidit Gujarati, which really was went a very long way to explaining why he didn't become the challenger, Nakamura. So I'm going to add that at the end of this column, depending on how long I take for what I'm doing now, because I have no idea, but we'll see. I may chop it. Anyway, so I looked at their games, and one game was Firouzja against Nakamura, and this ended up in an ending where Firouzja, after basically holding the balance the whole game, blundered. And there was a line which originally I thought was fairly simple, but then I slightly improved it. My brain got a little bit more together, and it turned out that this was very complicated, and it reaches a knight ending, an ending with a pawn against a knight and a pawn, where white has a pass to a pawn. And so I was thinking about this and trying to make a study out of it, and eventually I got to this version here, which was, I've been doing this on and off for a couple of weeks actually, quite a lot on. As I'm trying to go to sleep, things happen. My brain starts buzzing, the hamster starts running around in my head, and I start trying to improve it. I've got two versions. I've got this version, which is quite a good one, and then this is a better version, but on the other hand, the second one, it involves rather a complicated introduction, which you may or may not like. It might be too complicated for your taste, I don't know. People can tell me. Anyway, so there we are. I've got these two studies, and then I'll show you the Nakamura game, and then we'll decide whether to use the Nakamura Vidit game as well. So this is a study, white to play and draw. So the threat is b2 check, followed by knight moves and pawn equals queen. You can't go bishop b5 because of knight c3 check, followed by b2 check, or b2 check followed by knight c3. And so you have to play king b4. Bishop b4, of course, loses to knight c3 check. So you go king b4, b2 is the best move. In this version, black doesn't have a pawn on h7, which makes it much cleaner. It means that b2 is the only sensible try. In the other version, to make it sound, I had to add a black pawn on h7, which is a shame, but it just had to be done. So now you're threatening to play knight moves followed by b1 equals queen, and bishop b5 doesn't work. Knight c3, bishop b4, knight takes bishop, bishop takes knight, king takes pawn is quite an easy win. So you go here, here. And originally, as I said, I had a pawn on h7 for a long time, And then it finally dawned on me that actually you don't need the pawn on h7 because that is the only square for the bishop. If you go to g6, black gains a tempo with king g5. If you go to f5, you gain a tempo with bishop takes g4, and if you go to d3, you gain a tempo with bishop e2. And therefore, the only move is bishop h7. Now, you can't play pawn equals queen yet, because... okay, we can add this, I suppose. Takes, 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 here, equals. So that's a very simple line. Put a question mark there for what it matters. Right. So you have to go king g4. And now, okay, you're threatening king b1. And if you just carry on normally, then you'll play pawn equals queen and you'll win quite easily. But white has a march now, which he manages to chase the black pieces. So he goes king c3, pawn equals queen. Nothing else is any good. Takes, takes, and then he runs round and forks these two pieces. So unfortunately at this point I can't do anything about this. The bishop has to be on h2. I'd like it to be on g1 so that black only had one move to attack the bishop, but if it was on g1 then after knight f3 bishop e3 check would just draw. So you can't do that. That would draw very easily. So we have either of these moves, or knight f1, king takes, takes. So we got to this ending with a knight against a pawn, though a little bit earlier than the Nakamura game. Now, if you don't play a4 here, black can put the king inside the square of the pawn, and then bring the knight back to behind the pawn. So the knight will be on something like f6, the pawn will be on h5, the king, black king and white pawn will cancel each other out, and after king takes knight by white, h4 will queen the pawn. So you have to play a4, and you can prove you have to do this as well, and here. My main line is knight c6 now, but knight b5 is also interesting. Well, we'll do knight c6 first, we'll do the main line, and then So, white has got two ways that he can try to defend, either by bringing the king up the board to attack the knight, or by getting the king in the corner. If the king's in the corner, you have a position king h1 against black king on g3 and black pawn on h3. We'll assume for the moment the knight and pawn are the same on the queen side. So let's think about this. If it's black to move, black has to move the knight. Knight e5, pawn to the 7th, knight to one of the squares that goes to f2. Pawn equals queen, knight f2 check, king g1, h2 check, king f1. And in this position, after pawn equals queen check, the black queen on a8 can play queen takes queen, so white draws. However, if it's white's move with king h1 against king g3 and h3, you have to play king g1. Then you start with h2 check, king h1, knight e5, a7, knight g4 or d3, pawn equals queen, knight f2 checkmate. So that's a mutual Zugzwang. And it turns out that there is another mutual Zugzwang. You can look at this. It's not easy to find, I think, but given it's there, what actually happened? So when I'm composing a study, I use the tools available, which are an engine, or in this case a table base. So I just went king e2 because it's the obvious move, and it went beep and went king g3 and said that I was losing. And eventually I understood that actually king e2 against king g3 is a mutual Zugzwang. This has probably been done before by somebody, I'm guessing, I don't know. There's probably, what's the word, precursor, what is the word? It's anyway, which is a shame. But I mean, I think my introduction will certainly have added some value. So you actually have to go king e1. If you go something like h5, king f3 is a move. Doesn't work. Or if you go h5, the tempi are also right. Knight a7, h5, king. I mean, you can do that. h5, king f2, king h3, king g1, king g3, king h1, fourth black, fifth black, sixth, and king h1. So after that, so you go here. Now, if king f1, then the tempi are wrong and white loses. King f1, h5, king g1, h4, king h1, h3. But white goes here, and it's black to move. And this is mutual Zugzwang. Because now if you don't play king g2, then king f1 will draw. But if you do, then now white can counterattack. King here, knight here, king here, knight takes pawn, king to there. And I used the chess-based file on the PGN to keep this march route, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 moves. And obviously the black pawn now drops off. So that was my first version, and okay, and yes, we need to save it because I've added one tiny variation, haven't I? So white to draw final version. That's a final version, it probably is. So then I started trying to go backwards. What you do with this study is you go backwards and try to see if it's sound. Once upon a time, you spent ages and ages doing this with the aid of an engine, but by yourself. But now you've got an engine, so you just ask it, and then you move the pieces a bit more and ask it again. And eventually, I got to this version, which is sound but complicated. I've had to add the h7 pawn because otherwise, one of the endings would just be a trivial draw. And I tried for a long time to get a version where you play g4 check as white at some moment as your first move. But if you do, with the king on h5 and the bishop on e2, bishop takes g4, always won. I mean, I had a version that went, how did I do it? I nearly got it working. Let's have a look. I think I had the pawns somehow I was trying to play checkmate. How was I trying to do that? Can't imagine how I was trying to do it. But it almost worked, however it didn't. I can't remember. Anyway, I tried, and then I realised that maybe I could drive the king around, and eventually I got to a version close to here. I started actually with bishop g1 against king f4 and added the extra half move. And so I just said to the engine, "Oh great master, is this a draw?" And to my amazement and delight, it is. Now when I say it's a draw, it's complicated, so I'm going to show you. You've got to start bishop g1 check. That's fairly clear, I think. What I did, I made a huge number of variations while trying to check it. Because, I mean, the thing is, even though it's true that it's a draw, that isn't that much help for a person. And I like to have studies that at least a human being can understand. Excuse me. So eventually I then pruned it, and I've got a reasonably sensible version. So you go check here, check. King g5 is the main line. If you go... Sorry. So if you go after check, if you go king d3, check here, check here, king c4, king c4, I think you can just go knight e3 check, can't you? Did I even realize? No, you can just go bishop takes knight, of course, sorry. Can I do that? Sorry, check. What happens to king c4? I can go knight b6 check if I want to. I don't know if I need to, but that definitely is good enough. I can probably go anyway. Check here. King b2 is not a good move because of knight b4 checkmate. And I looked and the engine said both bishop b3 and knight e3 draw. And what I've tried to do, as I said, is to make it reasonably clean here. So I chose one of them and I've got a line. Pawn to there. Takes, king b4. And there are two moves. Bishop c2 is the best one. If you go b2, I think you're not really threatening very much. And this is basically reasonably okay. And that's just a draw. I mean, you don't need to go bishop d3. And so there are some other lines, but I mean, it would be amazing if this were lost, really. You're a whole piece up. Your king's quite close, so and black's got not got very much left on the king's side. Okay, so that we can believe. And so you actually, if we go back after check here, check here, check. So now you must go knight f2. It's only move really. Sorry, king h4. You've got to go. King takes pawn, knight f2 gains a tempo. And now there's knight f2, there's knight d2, there's bishop g3 check, and there's bishop e5. Bishop e5 I found while I was in bed one night, which was really a pain, because then I spent ages thinking about it. I knew it was a draw because the engine hadn't really mentioned it, but I didn't know why. So let's have a look at the moves that are possible here. So let's try knight takes d2, knight takes d2, bishop here. The cleanest move now is bishop f3, trapping the bishop. Takes, have to go back, check here, takes. Now we go there to gain a tempo, and then we start pushing the pawn. You have to go to d8, you've got to try to stop this pawn. You can't stop this. And you can either go h5 and knight f6 or knight h6 to g8, doesn't matter. That's fairly clear actually, and it's quite a clean line. So, and that's not so difficult. So the other ones are bishop g3 check, king takes pawn, bishop to there, king to there, knight takes pawn, knight takes knight, bishop back, bishop to here, takes, h5. And basically, it's almost impossible to stop this pawn. So you draw quite easily. So this wins. And the other one, which is this move, bishop e5, which I didn't even notice for ages, for days. And then you go here, check here. Mustn't go to h3, it's a draw in fact. If you go to h3 here, that's a good move, that makes a draw, apart from anything else. Yeah, that'll do. Okay. I don't know if knight d2 is now a problem slightly, is it? Probably not. You can probably take and play bishop b2. You have got a huge a pawn, of course. Okay, so that wasn't a problem. So eventually knight f2 is the best move. Pawn equals queen, certainly best takes. By the way, if there wasn't a pawn on h7, then knight f2 would draw. Knight f2, bishop e5. I think you just do something fairly simple. I can't remember. And you get the h pawn at the end. So that's why you have to have the pawn there. Here, king here. And my problem with the pawn on h7 and b2, without the pawn on h7, b2 is the only move. Here there are other moves. King g4 is quite interesting. And bishop b5 and knight to there. And a4, you can actually, bishop b7 does draw as well. Just there's quite a lot of play. Bishop f3 I think is the best you can do, really. Takes here. You can't stop this pawn. If you start stopping this pawn, then we'll go and chase the knight in a minute. If you want knight to there, a5, knight to there, a6, knight c7, a7, h5, king up, h4, king up, h3, king takes pawn. It's going to be a draw. So, and I thought this would be complicated, but actually it's not very. If king g5, you play bishop e5 is an excellent move. You're threatening queen f4 check, and after queen h4 you swap queens, play bishop f6 and take the pawn. And if you go this way, you give some checks. And here you're basically okay. They can play knight takes bishop if they want, but you've got queen d1 check. It's only one pawn now, and yeah, this is all right. I mean, you know, you have to have some belief that such a thing will be drawable, and it is. Okay, so that's king g4. So eventually you have to do, as I said, I pruned this enormously. So basically b2, bishop to there, knight to there, takes, and we're in the original study. Have to play king g4 and everything else happens. So, a lot of hard work. I'm proud of this. I mean, I've never made a study as long or complicated as this before. And it seems to basically work as far as I can see. You know, there's no... I mean, it is sound. It's just that pruning it down to a structure where you can actually see it properly is quite difficult, and I think this is about my best version. So now, how long did we start? About 18 past, what is it? 25 past maybe. I'll probably just do this. So now I'm going to show you the Firouzja game, and the Firouzja game is why I started this study. So I'm not that excited by what happened early on in the game. I mean, it's complicated. Bishop c5, c3, h6, all right. God knows they know so much about these things now. Bishop e7, queen to their castles. Huge quantities of different lines. I think Nakamura played this again. He played a5, knight b8, and I think, yeah, Firouzja repeated this in 2025, but also eventually lost. They did this, and yeah, eventually he lost this game as well, actually. I think it should be a little bit better for white, presumably, but it's... Black does have squares for his pieces. Not sure if that's the best move, but it's... God knows it's complicated enough. And on they went. They're at the races, really, by now. It's just very complicated. You know, I don't know. Basically, when I stuck an engine on, then it didn't deviate from equals until Firouzja played the losing blunder, or not seriously. This was very fine, this placement of the queen and these minor pieces somehow holding everything. I think knight b3 was better or something, I believe. Is that right? I've only, I mean, as I said, I haven't worried that much about it. So, Nakamura must have enjoyed playing this game, I imagine. I would enjoy putting these pieces in such funny squares. Okay. And he's still trying to win, clearly. I don't know when I think it's still equal, actually, for a very long time. But there is a moment. So he's just trying to surround that e6 pawn. Apparently this is still a draw, right up to the moment that it isn't. I don't know. Rook f2 presumably knight takes bishop, so you do it this way. Funny position that, yeah. And because of the many passed pawns, black is doing quite well here. I think you can go king f2 as well, possibly. Okay, they did this anyway. Check here, here. And here, this is the position where Firouzja blundered. He could just have played either rook d8 or there's something else he can do. He can go rook a8. He played king takes pawn, which just loses to this. He had a complete brain fart. Because now b2 is defended by the fork, so black just wins. Okay, so actually rook d8 is supposed to be the best move, but the line I was looking at was this one. Rook a8. Here, check here. Here, here, here. You can see this is becoming quite familiar now. a5 here, a6. So originally when I looked at this, I looked at knight e5, a7, knight c4, king d3, knight b6, which is a very simple draw. But then I realised you can go here now. Check here, here. And we get to the position which was where I started my study, apart from the fact that king's in d2. And that means that king e1 does draw, but so does king e3, king g3, king e2, which is why I was working to get the king on d1, which involved getting the bishop there to be captured. So there we are. I think that'll do. I think I'm going to delete this game because I don't think we really need it in this thing, and I'll very, very slightly rewrite this so I don't mention it. Don't mention I'm going to use it, and I hope you've enjoyed this. So I said then at the end, I hope a couple of things. I hope you've been enjoying the candidates as much as I have. Tremendous battle. I'm doing this actually on Friday as Sindarov forges ahead and Caruana is in hot pursuit, but at a very respectful distance. Very impressed by Sindarov. Obviously the first round game made a huge difference. If Yesipenko had beaten him, he'd probably have 2 points less or something than he does. But actually, in a big tournament, almost the best thing possible to happen is that you start by swindling them from a bad position. And if you can do a 180-degree turn, a complete turn, do I mean 360 or... No, just turn it around totally, then rather than 90 degrees, then that's wonderful. And... so I also said, I don't know if you know, if anybody else, people will have noticed that in the first round in Toronto and the first round now in Cyprus, Caruana as white against Nakamura ended up with queen, rook and white squared bishop against queen, rook and dark squared bishop. So I was wondering about whether they have a lot of games with those opposite coloured bishops, and I did a crude test in my chess space, and I think they're about 26%. And with opposite colour bishops at some moment. I mean, I didn't at all try to classify them, and I think it's probably about 20%, I'm guessing, normally. And so there we are. So I will see you again on May the 3rd. Now I'm going to just check I am recording, otherwise there'll be a silent scream that you won't hear. And thank heavens that little thing is red at the top. Okay, I'm stopping. Cheers, see you on May the